Hello my friends, I hope everyone is trying their best to stay safe during the global crisis. On today's video we're going to be talking yet again about Final Fantasy. Now, on a previous video I mentioned that Final Fantasy is one of the most diverse JRPGs. It's certainly up there with the likes of Pokemon in terms of diversity. But, having said that, like Pokemon, Final Fantasy has also had its share of racial issues. And so today I'm going to be talking about some whitewashing that happened in the Final Fantasy series. By the way, if you're new here, I talk about video games pretty often. Usually I include a lot of educational information in those videos about culture. Today is obviously more so an issue about diversity. Either way, I hope if you are enjoying today's video, then you'll click that like and subscribe button. Alright, let's get on with the show. Now, many Final Fantasy fans, particularly the casual players, will probably think that Barret Wallace from Final Fantasy VII was the first black man in the series, but there were in fact other dark-skinned characters before him. Today we're going to be talking about General Leo from Final Fantasy VI and Minwu from Final Fantasy II. And yes, I'm well aware that many people probably interpret Minwu as being Arab, but keep in mind, he could certainly be interpreted as a black man as well because Africans also wore turbans. Either way, he's undeniably a dark-skinned man. So from what I've heard, the reason that Square Enix gives for not giving these characters their proper skin tones is that they were dealing with color palette limitations brought on from the fact that they were working with old systems like the SNES and the NES. Now, many gamers seem to take Square Enix at their word, and to be fair, I've never programmed for a SNES or an NES, but I don't personally buy that shit, so today I'm going to show you my reasons for why I think they could have preserved these characters' darker skin tones. Let's start with Final Fantasy VI because this will be easy as hell to prove. Final Fantasy VI already has dark-skinned characters in it. The color palettes are right fucking there. The four characters I have on screen now are Meduin, which is Terra's father, the main character's father. The other character is the Elder Esper, or Esper Elder, whatever, same thing. He is the elder of all the magical beings. The third character is Dadaluma, who I think is some kind of ogre or something like that. Either way, he's humanoid. And Vargas is just straight up a dark-skinned man. He's not some magic being like the others, he's just a dude. And specifically, he's one of Sabin's fellow martial arts students. And just a quick note, yes, Vargas and Dadaluma appear to be using the same sprite, because a lot of old video games would just, even today, a lot of video games will reuse the same character model but change something slightly just so that they have another character. Anyway, just for fun and also to prove my point, I took the color palettes from Vargas and the color palette from Dadaluma and applied those colors to General Leo's sprite. And hey, look at that, that looks pretty good. Yes, I know it doesn't quite preserve his blonde hair as well as the original sprite, but more importantly, it gives him the dark skin. That's way more important than hair color, because even Terra, the main character of the game, is technically supposed to have blonde hair, but her sprite has green hair, so clearly hair color is not priority. So yeah, this is what General Leo would have looked like if they had given him the proper skin tone back on the SNES. I personally like the version that uses Dadaluma's color set better than the one that uses Vargas's color set, but either way, either one of these color palettes for General Leo would have been great. Quick note, on the unlikely event that the color palettes for General Leo would have only been limited to the playable characters, I made another color palette for him based on Locke's color palette, who is of course a very important playable character in the game. How does that work? Locke has brown gloves, you use those browns for his skin tone. Yes, this means he can't have green for his coat color, but that's a small price to pay if that's how we gotta do it. Either way, I'm pretty sure this definitively proves that there's no excuse. They could definitely have had brown skin for General Leo. Now, to be fair to Square Enix, they obviously have gotten better over the years, and in the most recent remake of Final Fantasy VI, which I believe is on the phone, which I don't play phone games, but whatever. In that remake, they have redone a lot of the graphics. A lot of people don't like how the graphics look on that, and I mean the old sprite work looks good. The new graphics, But one great thing they did do on that new mobile version of Final Fantasy VI is they finally did give General Leo his darker skin tone. So good work on that, Square Enix. Next up, let's talk about Minwu from Final Fantasy II. And this, of course, is a game that was on the original Nintendo. The NES was pretty weak hardware. So to some extent you can kind of understand why Final Fantasy II didn't have as wide of a color selection. But I believe that if they really wanted to, they could have added an additional color palette just for Minwu. And let me show you why. If you look at every playable character from Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II, you'll notice that each one of those characters uses one of only two color palettes. One of the color palettes consists of red and white and a light skin tone. The other color palette consists of brown, blue, and a sort of yellowish tan skin tone. But if you look at the next and last Final Fantasy for the NES, Final Fantasy III, there is in fact a third color palette that was created. And why did they make this new color palette? For the simple reason of wanting some characters to wear green. So I feel like this is proof that if they really wanted to, if they didn't rush Final Fantasy II like they were basically forced to by the company, they probably could have put a third color palette into Final Fantasy II just so that Minwu could have the proper skin tone that he deserves. And on that note, I of course made a mock-up of what Minwu would look like if he was presented with darker skin on the NES. And if you're wondering, the brown color that I use for this version of Minwu is a color that I grabbed from one of the enemy sprites in Final Fantasy II. So this color already existed within the game. Interestingly enough, when I decided to remake Minwu's face icon, I did not actually have to invent a new color palette. I simply shifted the dark browns over to the main color of his face. So he's using the same color palette he did on the NES for his face, but I simply emphasized the darker brown to make his face look darker. And that's it. That's all I had to do. And just because I felt like it, I decided to change his nose ever so slightly. Speaking of Minwu's face portrait, it's gone through a number of changes through the various remakes that have been done over the years. Now, as you can see, in the original NES, he has basically the same skin tone as many of the other characters, because they just didn't bother to make him darker. To be fair, he is using the tanner of the two skin tones, but either way, you know. But next, on the PlayStation remake, they gave his face portrait dark skin. Great. The weird fucking thing is, on the GBA remake, which came later, whitewashed him. What? Luckily, they, I guess, wised up, and on the next remake on the PSP, they gave him dark skin again. So, the latest remake of Final Fantasy II, his face portrait is dark. Good. Unfortunately, the same logic didn't apply to the actual character sprites in-game. The in-game sprites, even on the PSP, are all light skin. Why? Are you kidding me? The PSP is not limited. The PSP can do plenty of colors. What the fuck? So whenever they do another remake of Final Fantasy II, they definitely need to address that. In Final Fantasy II, let me just say this. I've played almost every Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy II is definitely, if not the worst, the worst. But it's such an interesting fucking game. Like, despite all of Final Fantasy II's flaws, it's really freaking interesting. And if they could do the dungeon design better, mostly just the dungeon design better, and of course some of the gameplay stuff better, then it could be a fucking fantastic Final Fantasy game if they took the time to give it a proper remake. And they still haven't done that yet. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the argument I presented today about how I believe these characters should have been able to be portrayed with dark skin even on those older consoles. Probably, hopefully, we'll never have to see whitewashing happen again in the Final Fantasy series, since Square Enix is getting better at adding diversity. But having said that, we still haven't been given a black main character in the Final Fantasy series, and that should be the series' next milestone that they should try to do, is give us a black main character. And I don't mean like a customizable character in Final Fantasy 11 or 14. I'm sure I never played the online games because I don't care about massively multiplayer online games, but I'm sure in those games you probably can customize your character's skin tone, and that's great. But I'm talking about an actual character who is black and cannot be customized, period. That's what Final Fantasy should aim for next, to continue to diversify their games. And the funny thing is, in some older games, Romancing Saga 3 had a black man named Herod that you can choose as your main character, and Trials of Mana, which is what they're calling it now, Trials of Mana for the Super Nintendo, also had a black character named Kevin that you could have chosen as your primary character. So, Square Enix has essentially already done it, but not in their main line series Final Fantasy. Come on! Most people have never even heard of Romancing Saga, but almost every gamer has heard of Final Fantasy. So give Final Fantasy a black main character. Alright. I think that's a good note to end on, so hope you enjoyed the video, folks. Have a lovely day.